Good morning, gentlemen. दोस्तों, good morning. I'm going to talk today on a very, very important topic. और ये बात, this topic came up because yesterday when I was sitting in the bar with one of my friends, he asked me a question. He asked me, is there any country in the world which gives away its territory for free to other countries more like a fool or without any strategic implications? So I was a little nonplussed initially, but then I put my thinking cap on and I realized that country is India. And this all happened when the Congress government was in power from 1947 onwards. It's a very sad story. It's nothing to feel very pleased about. But the fact remains that India is the one country in the world, I don't think there's any other country which gives away its territory gratis, free to other countries. I will tell you about that later. But before that, we must remember that any country which cedes land to the other country cedes only after it has been defeated. Even Alexander handed a lot of territory to Raja Porus, but that was after he was defeated in the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BC. Similarly, at the end of the Second World War, a large part of eastern Germany was incorporated as part of Poland. That was because Germany had been destroyed. Similarly, the Japanese Empire was taken away, and Formosa, which had been part of Japan for 50 years, was also taken away, handed over to China, because the Japanese had been annihilated with 2 atomic bombs. But India is the one country in the world which, being the omnipotent power in Southeast Asia, still gifted away land and islands to other people. I'm not talking of Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin, as we know, was taken away by the Chinese, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was just sleeping. And he kept sleeping like Rip Van Winkle. You know Rip Van Winkle, that famous man who went to sleep. And then when he woke up, 20 years had elapsed. Well, this is precisely what Panditji did. He went to sleep, and China took away the entire Aksai Chin, almost 30,000 square miles. I don't think any country or there's any example in world history of such a thing happening. Now, that is one aspect, but there are 2 other hotspots in the world which people are not really aware of. First are the Coco Islands, which are just 30 miles from the northern tip of the Andaman Islands. Now, we must remember that the British were the omnipotent power in India, and India was their colony, and they were ruling both Burma and India. Andaman Islands had always been considered as part of India, and so were the Coco Islands. Now, the Coco Islands are closer to Burma, but they're very close to the Andaman Islands also. And Jawaharlal Nehru in 1948 had some harebrained schemes. I mean, I really can't think how this man was really working and how his mind was functioning, because he seemed had no strategic sense or any vision of world history. He didn't know a damn thing. And in 1948, he gifted those islands to Burma at a time when India was going to establish diplomatic relations with them as a sign of peace, as a sign that we want to be friends with you. I mean, is that the way you go about it? You give your own territory to them? And Nehru has gone on record and said that he didn't think those islands were important. And they are so important now that the Chinese have set up a surveillance post there. And what is happening? They are spying on Indian warships, Indian exercises of rockets, everything. And India can't do a thing about it because Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, a very great Prime Minister, has gifted those islands to Burma. Now you can't get them back unless you have war. So that is one aspect of it. I'll discuss that later. But this is not the end of it. There's a small island about a kilometer and a half, I think maybe 1.5 kilometers or 2 kilometers square miles in the Palk Strait between India and Sri Lanka. It's closer to India. This island historically was administered by the Indian Raja from Tamil Nadu. But there is a church on the island which owed allegiance to the church in Jaffna. And so the Lankans said, well, since this church owes allegiance to the church in Jaffna, it's part of Lanka. And this sort of dispute was continuing all the time. And the name of the island is Kashvetu, and the Lankans were exercising their right. They would arrest the Indian fishermen, take them away from there, and India was just sleeping. Now, it bugs me, or rather, I'm unable to understand that militarily, even in that time, India was 10 times more powerful than Burma, and as well as Sri Lanka, that time known as Ceylon, and yet the Indians never exerted themselves. And Jawaharlal Nehru has gone on record and made a statement that I'm not really concerned about that island, small island in the Palk Strait. I'm not bothered about it. Only thing I don't want is questions for this island to come up again in Parliament. What the hell was this man talking? He was a man, as I told you, devoid of any strategic vision. He didn't know a damn thing on world politics and power politics. And finally he died away in 1964, but in 1974, the dispute went up at a time when India was so powerful. India had beaten Pakistan, hell-bent and for leather, thrashed the Pakistanis, broken the country into two. India was the omnipotent power in Southeast Asia, and this had been recognized by the Americans. Richard Nixon had recognized it. India is the dominant power in Southeast Asia. Yet in 1974, this island, Kashvetu Island, was handed over to Sri Lanka by none other than Indira Gandhi. Now, what were her compulsions to hand over this island to Sri Lanka? I mean, beats my imagination. If nothing else, the Indians could have easily occupied that island. They had the navy, the military. At that time, India even had an aircraft carrier. The first aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, was there. And that's not a difficult thing at all. Lanka were no sheikhs as a power, nothing. Yet they were acting as a bigger power, and their air force had even carried out an exercise there, and the Indians was just sitting and sleeping. At that time, the Tamil Nadu government was headed by Karunanidhi. I think he has a lot to answer to the Tamil people as how he agreed with Indira Gandhi to hand over this land, this island, to the Lankans, that is Ceylon at that time. So, gentlemen, this island has become part of Sri Lanka. And a very strategic post has been lost. Now this is going to complicate situations further because Lanka is not your India's friend. They have given the Hambantota port to unleash to China for 99 years with the provision that there will be no military people going there. Fair enough. But if you go to that island port, you will find a lot of men in civilian clothes, but they are marching around like soldiers. So you know the Chinese are good at disguise. So there you are. Now the next point which I am coming to is what happens tomorrow if the Chinese set up a listening post in the Kashvetu Islands. It's very possible. And what is India going to do? India needs to be assertive. And one must remember historically that India lost to the Muslim invaders because they were not assertive enough. They couldn't face up to people like Muhammad of Ghazni, who came to India 18 times and every time defeated the local kings and Hindus, and they were not united. In those days, Raja Bhoj was the man who was the bigger king, and he never confronted Muhammad Ghazni any time. Why? We don't know. Even the Somnath temple was being destroyed, he was sleeping, God knows where. So, gentlemen, point is the Indians lacked initiative, lacked strategic intelligence. With the result, they became slaves for 900 years. भाई अब बैठिए हमारे नौकर बन के रहिए. That is precisely what in stark language I have to state. Now this island which has been handed to Lanka is now again in the news because the leader of the BJP, that is Mr. Annamalai, has asked the RTI as to what happened, how the islands were handed over to Lanka. And the reply has come, and this is what it says, which I'm telling you, that the islands were gifted to Lanka by Indira Gandhi in connivance with the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister at that time, Mr. Karunanidhi. There is rarely an incident, rather I think there is no incident where a more powerful country with a bigger army and just gives away part of its territory to its neighbors. Nehru did that. He handed over the Coco Islands to Burma, and now the Chinese have a listening post there. Similarly, Indira Gandhi, in connivance with Karunanidhi, handed over this island to Sri Lanka, and now the Indians have got no say there at all. It's a very, very important strategic post, and just 20 miles from the Indian coast. And logically and historically, it was a part of India. Just having one church there, which had allegiance to the church in Jaffna, doesn't make that island a Lankan island. And even if it was a Lankan island, let's take that argument, India should have militarily occupied that island. There was nothing to get worried about. But this Congress party, which has led India to doom, had leaders who had no vision. And I think the only vision they had was to keep a divide in the electorate, keep on feeding the minorities, that is the Muslims, with false promises that we'll do this, we'll defend you, we'll do that, we'll do this. And that result was they created a vote bank, that's all. We want to come back to power. They never did anything for the Muslims, I will officially tell you. In terms of education, jobs, Muslims are way down in the social ladder. But at the same time, they were creating these vote banks. They wouldn't touch the Muslim personal law. They won't do so many things. They would tax the Hindu temples, but not the Waqf board. Waqf board could nahi chuna. That income is for the Muslims. Well, gentlemen, I can talk on 101 topics in which the Congress party, and in particular Jawaharlal Nehru, I think, frankly, if you ask me as a soldier who's got an association with the Indian state for over 100 years, my grandfather, my father, we were all wore the uniform of the Indian Armed Forces. It's a very discouraging thing that we had a man like Jawaharlal Nehru as a prime minister to gift away all these lands to either to Lanka or to Burma. Why should you do it? I don't understand it. Gentlemen, now India cannot get the island back unless India mounts a military operation, which should be very, very easy. And even now I will say there's nothing to get frightened of the United States or the United Nations or something like that, because I will give you an example of Cyprus. Cyprus was divided into two parts. It had a Muslim northern part and a Christian part. And it is the Turks which invaded Cyprus and set up their own regime in Cyprus. And the United States and the United Nations couldn't do a thing. And that division continues even now. Turkey controls the northern part of Cyprus. I don't see why India cannot control this small island in the Palk Strait. India has to control it because it's a very great strategic outpost for the Indian Navy and for projection of Indian power. The similar weakness I'm seeing as far as the Maldives is concerned. I will give credit to Rajiv Gandhi because he was the man who really put the first time in Indian history gave an operational role to the Indian Army outside the geographical limits of India. He had authorized the invasion of the Maldives in 1988. That's it. When the Indians IL-76 aircrafts with troops on board, commanded by Brigadier Balsara, landed in the Maldives. And they finished off an insurrection which was going on there from the rebels who ran away into the ocean, or they were caught, shot, God knows. And now the Maldives are showing a finger to India with the help of China. In once earlier also I had stated that China cannot sustain a military campaign in the Maldives. And I do not know why Mr. Narendra Modi could not take the Maldives by the scruff of their neck. We don't want to bother about things because sometimes you have to make a stand. You remember, like Horatio on the burning bridge, when he made the stand on the bridge against the invaders to save Rome. Well, you got to make a stand. You can't just all the time keep on saying that we'll do this, we'll do that, and then, finally pipe down. So the Cocoa Islands is one aspect. The second is Kashmir too, and the third is Maldives. India has to exert its power if it wants to become a great nation. But question is, does India want to do that? Narendra Modi has done a lot, I will say this much. He's changed the Indian thinking. But there are some things which are beyond him, and this island is one of those. Because it's a very dangerous proposition now, because the island was after all gifted away by India. And now 50 years have elapsed. And you can't wake up like Rip Van Winkle after 50 years and say, give the island back to us. But yes, India can say historical precedent, ask for the island back. And in case Lanka refuses, we would be justified in taking military action. And as far as the Maldives is concerned, I don't think really we should bother about that small clump of islands. But at the same time, we must ensure that the Chinese don't come there. And I don't see any reason why India cannot militarily intervene there like the Turks did in Cyprus. So this is food for thought. I think Cocoa Island is a little tricky because they were handed over way back in 1948 on lease to the Burmese, and now the Burmese in any case never give that land, and that is something, looks a little fait accompli to me. It's a little difficult to get it back because it's also going out of India's sphere of influence, and Burma is very close to China, so that is a dangerous proposition. And of course, getting Aksai Chin is again out of question. I mean, there's no question India will ever get Aksai Chin back. So the best thing is, India has a border settlement with China and over Aksai Chin to China. There's no choice. If you want peace, you have to do that. But by just showing Aksai Chin always as a part of India, when India never had a damn sepoy or a policeman in that entire region for God knows donkey's years, I don't think you have any claim over that territory in any case. So here are two different propositions I've given you. Probably we'll have to forget about Aksai Chin, which is again Nehru's blunder, but then what can you do? Nehru's gone. You can't get him out of the grave and say, well, undo what you have done. But we can get Kashmir back. We can pressurize the Maldives. And we can pressurize Burma not to hand over the Cocoa Islands to the Chinese to set up any surveillance facility there. Narendra Modi, I think, is on the right track in projection of power. He's the first Indian Prime Minister after 1947 who is projecting Indian power all around him. Let's hope he succeeds. But at the same time, I'm a little saddened that we should have lost so much for nothing. Why these people did it, I wonder if they will ever tell, because they're no longer there, or whether anything is going to happen further. Well, gentlemen, I think I'll close. Probably something is going to happen as far as the Kashmir Island is concerned, because it has come in the notice of the BJP government, and thanks to Mr. Annamalai, who had dug up the grave of this decision in 1974 to hand them over to Ceylon. That time, that was the name given to Sri Lanka. So we'll have to see. And Lanka definitely is not India's friend. You know, the Prime Minister Ranat Singh is running around to China every time, and so is the Mr. Muiza, the President of the Maldives. So these two countries need to be taught a lesson. I think people can understand what I'm talking about. If you want to be a great power, you're going to exercise it so that people respect you. America is a great power because it operates right from the Philippines to Japan. Russia is a power in its own right. It has not got scared of NATO or something and not done anything in Ukraine. They've invaded Ukraine, occupied 20% of territory, and now as it stands, Ukraine is heading for defeat. Well, gentlemen, I have nothing more to say. I hope you like this channel of mine. Please share with your friends. I expect you to subscribe. And I'll say goodbye and God bless. Take care till we meet again.